Okay, that was weird. Going from Phil Collins and the iconic drum solo to that. But hey, what are you going to do? So, hey, Ben, everyone, I was living vicariously through you. Probably the most played drum section in the world, played on many dashboards and steering wheels around the world. After graduating high school, I went and signed up to go to trade school to become a carpenter. I've always loved working with my hands, and well, construction is about as close to working with your hands as you can get, and so off I went. A buddy of mine that I went to school with, his dad worked for a large construction company in Vancouver, and he pulled a few strings for me, and he had a job and apprenticeship all lined up for me for when I graduated. Things were looking great until interest rates went through the roof. I don't know if you remember that, if you were around in the early 80s or if you've read about it in school. Interest rates just skyrocketed. Mortgage rates were north of 20%. Car loans were hovering around 30%. A buddy of mine bought a truck. His interest rate, annual interest rate, was 26.5%. Like, just unbelievable. Well, as a result, construction just dried up, and along with it, my job offer. And that's when I found myself employed as a truck driver, delivering office supplies throughout the Lower Mainland, Richmond, Vancouver. And there was a learning curve to it. It took me about a month and $400 in parking tickets to figure out that for me to park in a commercial loading zone, I actually had to have a commercial plate. Now, one day before I had figured all that out, I was about 3 tickets into my day, 3 parking tickets into my day, and I was out by UBC on a residential street looking for a home office to deliver some supplies, and I'm scanning around looking for the address, and I find it. It happens to be on the opposite side of the street that I'm on. So I stop, I look both ways, I don't see anyone coming, and I pull a U-turn. And that's when I heard the chirp of a siren. And so I pull over, and I watch as a Vancouver police officer makes his way to the driver's side window of my truck. And he walked up and he said, "Good afternoon." He says, "If you're going to pull a maneuver like that, you might want to check to see if there's any traffic coming." To which I replied, "I did, and I didn't see anyone." And he says, "Well, maybe next time you should do a better job at it because you didn't see me." Well, he grabbed my license and registration, and he went back to his car. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking, great, another ticket, like, what an awesome day this is turning out to be. And I look at my side view mirror, and I see him. He's coming back, and he's got his little ticket book in his hand. And as I watched him approach, I remember thinking how much I'd love to let him know, with a very sarcastic sound to my voice, tone in my voice, how impressed I was with the great job he was doing keeping our city safe from the criminal element. Right away, the logical side of my brain kicked in and said, "Don't do it." But the other side of my brain said, "No, do it, because, man, that's going to feel good." And the battle started. It was like, do it, don't do it, yes, go for it, no, don't go for it, it's going to end bad. Well, the cop came and he handed me a ticket for $30 and 2 demerit points for pulling an illegal U-turn. And I kind of took it threw it on the dash, and all the while the battle is raging in my head. Do it, don't do it, yes, go for it, don't go for it. The cop turned, he starts to walk back to his car, and that's when I said to him, "Can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, "How long did it take you to become a Vancouver police officer?" And he said, "Just over a year." And it's very intense training, lots to remember and do, and physical. And that's when I said, "Wow, a whole year to learn how to write a ticket properly." That's when he said, "Could you step out of the vehicle?" And so I did. And he proceeded to walk around my truck, and he wrote me up for every single little deficiency he could find. I had a cracked taillight. Apparently my license plate light wasn't working. I had a crack in my side view mirror. $300 later, man, I should have just kept my mouth shut. Well, good morning. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Garry. I'm a criminal. Actually, I'm not. I'm one of the pastors here, but it shows you there's hope, right? Welcome to the meeting place. If you're joining us for the first time, I hope you'll come back. But if you're here for the first time or you missed last week, we're in a series that we kicked off called Overwhelmed, where we're exploring some of the things in our lives that can lead to overwhelm and just overwhelm us in all sorts of ways. And last week we kicked it all off looking at how we are often overwhelmed with trying to live up to other people's expectations. And if you missed that message, you can catch up online, or as you heard in the preview, download our new app. It's on there, and I'd encourage you to do that, and you can listen to it or watch it on there. Today we're looking at, if you haven't figured out, being overwhelmed with temptation. My temptation was to tell the cop off, because temptation is everywhere, isn't it? It shows up all over the place. We come face to face with it pretty much every day to some degree or another. I mean, watch a beer commercial. There's a temptation for you, right? I want to be in a beer commercial. For some of us, here's how temptation shows up. It shows up that we want to sneak that snack, in the middle of the day or the middle of the night when we're on that diet, right? It's just that piece of cake is just screaming at you, come on, just a little bite. It's just a little bite. For others, the temptation is to play just one more game of Fortnite before I go to bed. Just one more game. Just play one more game. Or if you're a bookworm, it's, like my wife, just read one more chapter before I go to bed. One more chapter. Or how about this? Being tempted, you wake up in the morning, being tempted to skip your workout because you're tired from playing one more game of Fortnite, right? Maybe you're tempted right now to be checking your Instagram account because you see the little indicators coming in. I can see you. Well, sometimes our battle with temptations can have more serious implications, right? The temptation to have one more sip, one toke, one drag, one tiny peek at an adult website, or just to get back at someone that has caused us harm. Temptations, man, they're not only all around us, but they're persistent, aren't they? They constantly woo us. They're like those mermaids that we read about in folklore with the sailors, just wooing them into the rocks. It'll be okay. Just get closer. Just get closer. And then we do, and then when they smash on the rocks. Man, I remember when I quit smoking. I smoked for, get written up for tickets. I smoke. Wow. Okay, we're in a bad spot here. But I remember when I quit smoking, the lengths I would go to accidentally on purpose find someone I knew who smoked. So I could either borrow a smoke, that would be the best outcome, or at least just have a drag, that little puff. And it was all so I could just quiet that voice in my head that just said, look, you're going to be more successful to quit if you just take the edge off. Just one puff, one smoke. How can it hurt? Well, as you can imagine, my buddy that smoked was suddenly my closest friend. We ran into each other every day. Temptations, man, they're all around us. They're persistent. And here's the other thing. They all start the same way. And we get a good look at, I called it a life cycle at first, but then I heard someone else call it a death cycle, the death cycle of temptations. And we find this cycle in some words written by James, Jesus' half-brother. And it's really interesting how he lays this all out. Listen to what he says. He says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. So the first thing that jumped out for me is James says, when. When you are tempted. It's not if, it's when. So right off the bat, he lets us know that, hey, it's going to happen. You're going to be tempted. But when it does, don't blame God. Came across a story of a man who started a diet. He wanted to lose some weight, and he struggled with resisting sweets. That was his temptation. And he especially loved to take part in the delicacies of this certain bakery in his hometown. And one day he's out running errands. He realizes that his route is going to take him right in front of this bakery. And so right away he's like, I got to do something, man, because if I don't, I'm going to cave and I'm going to go into that bakery. And so here's what he does. He prays. And he says, God, you know how much I want to lose some weight. You know how I really like those cakes in that bakery. And so here's my prayer. God, if you want me to stop at that bakery, then leave a parking space open right in front of the bakery, and then I'll know that you want me to be there. And wouldn't you know it, God answered his prayer. There was a parking space on the 7th time around the block. You know, we laugh, but here's the thing, and I'll speak from personal experience. When I'm caught with my hand in the proverbial cookie jar, when I've succumbed to a temptation and I get caught, I love to blame someone else for it. You know, if I'm caught stealing an actual cookie, it's my mom's fault because she left the cookie jar out. How was I supposed to resist that? But who better to blame than God, right? I mean, what we learn is that he's all-powerful, all-knowing. So if that's true, then he could have taken that temptation away, but he didn't, so well, therefore it's his fault. Makes sense, right? James continues and he says this, he says, God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. According to James, temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. They're not from God, they come from our own desires. Now, one thing I want to just make clear here, because we all are going to be tempted, you know, as we heard from James, you know, when you are tempted, it's important to note that there's a difference between temptation and wrongdoing. Temptation in and of itself is not wrong. Jesus himself was tempted, and we're gonna look at that in just a little bit here. But temptation only becomes an issue when we actually give into it, either physically or in our minds and our hearts. And here's what I mean. Here's an example. The temptation to lust. Okay, that's a big one. It's normal for us to notice people's bodies and personalities, and to even have a physical reaction or attraction to someone's presence. God wired us that way, right? It's a natural thing. We are all sexual creatures. We were made to be sexual, to have and enjoy sexual relations in the confines and the commitment of a marriage relationship. Here's where things kind of get messed, is the temptation of lust is wrong when we give into the desire to violate those confines of marriage, either before, during, or after marriage, or to choose to dwell or fantasize about it, because that turns the temptation inward and it takes up residence in our hearts and our minds. Temptation in and of itself is not wrong. It's when we actually cross the line. That's where we run into issues and problems. Take a look for yourself what the Bible says about this. The words will be up behind me. Remember that the temptations that come into your life are no different from what others experience. God is faithful. He will keep the temptation from becoming so strong that you can't stand up against it. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you will not give into it. We can stand up to temptation. We don't have to give into it. I mean, we all do from time to time, but here's the thing. That is entirely our choice. For me, the temptation was to lip off that cop. Just let him know how my day was going. I had a choice, keep my mouth shut or beak off. I chose the latter. And had I chose the latter, I would have avoided all the consequences of those fines. But I gave in to that desire to scratch that itch. And my acting on that temptation cost me. And as James writes, giving into temptation comes with a cost. Listen to what he says. He says, these desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. That's a pretty big cost, wouldn't you say? I think the cost is even greater. And here's what I mean. I'm just going to throw this out for you. I don't think James is necessarily just talking about physical death. I think he's talking about spiritual death. Here's what I mean. Even if whatever desire that we give into does not kill us outright, whether that's a drug overdose, whatever it happens to be, it kills a part of us, our humanity, reducing our capacity to sense God's presence, to receive his love, to feel fully alive, to experience compassion, empathy, joy, peace. Not to mention that depending on whatever it is we've given into, we almost are always harming ourselves, if not those around us. The question becomes, if we are going to be tempted, like when we are going to be tempted, what do we do? What do we do when it comes knocking? Bottom line, if I was just going to bottom line it, the best thing we can do is look to the one who is able to overcome temptation. Jesus. As I mentioned earlier, Jesus was tempted, yet he never once gave in. Never. Now you may be sitting there thinking, well, that's awesome, but I ain't Jesus. Yeah, I've given in more than once, and I'm probably going to do it again. I hear you. We're human, right? So, maybe you're thinking, well, so how does his successfully overcoming temptation help me? It's a great question. I love these words found in the book of Hebrews. Listen to what the writer says. He says, since he, and he's referring to Jesus, himself has gone through suffering and temptation, he is able to help us when we are being tempted. Jesus understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same temptations we do, yet he did not sin. For me, personally, man, those words are the most comforting, encouraging words ever written. And here's why. For years, and I've shared this here before, but maybe this is true for you. For years, I grew up with the picture that God was angry. He was perpetually disappointed and ticked off with me because I constantly tripped up and fell into temptation. Well, here's a question for you. Is that true? Is God angry? Is he disappointed in us? Is he frustrated with us? I would say no, not even close. Not even close. Again, listen to these writers of this writer of Hebrew who's reminding people who just want to bail on the whole Jesus thing and kind of go back to what they know. He says, look, man, if you want to know what God is like, here's what you do. The Son, he says to them, the Son, Jesus, is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being. Or these words from Paul, who we talk about a lot around here, ended up writing half of what is now known as the New Testament after he had a run-in with the resurrected Jesus and experienced grace and mercy and forgiveness. He writes this, though he, Jesus, was God, here's a big statement, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. You know what those writers are saying? That if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus, because Jesus was God. That's the Christmas story. That's God coming to this earth, this planet, to be with us, to show us a better way to live life. And when he did that, when he subjected himself to that, he experienced everything you and I experience. Gravity, hunger, sleep, being tired, frustrated, rejection, anxiety, joy, happiness, sorrow, grief, and temptation. I just find so much comfort in those words because they remind me that God gets me. He understands me. Just think about that for a second. The God who created everything, the planets, the stars, the fish, the birds, the mountains, the sea, everything, including you and me, understands exactly what we're going through when we're facing temptation. He's been there. And he isn't distant or uncaring. He's exactly the opposite. He's close and he's caring. And he wants nothing more than to come alongside you and I and help us when we are feeling overwhelmed with temptation. And I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty pretty darn cool on the cool scale. It's kind of off to the right. Temptation, man, it's all around us. Maybe you're going to go to the food court and be tempted to eat KFC instead of Subway. I don't know. But it's all around us, right? And so I want to just leave you really quickly with a couple of practical things that can help us in our struggle when we're feeling overwhelmed with temptation. A couple of years ago, I came across a really cool exercise, and some of you may be familiar with it. It's called HALTS. It's an acronym. And it's simple, memorable checklist that you can go through to help you identify when you may be open to the lure of temptation, okay? So the H in HALTS is hungry. When we're hungry, our energy levels drop, and along with it, our strength, making it harder for us to resist temptation. A is for anger. Anger is a powerful emotion. That's what I was experiencing that day in that truck. I was ticked at that cop and my stupidity and everything else. He just grabbed a hold of me, and I just had to kind of even the scale somehow, which it didn't actually do. L is for loneliness. You know, loneliness can make us prone to the passions of lust and temptation, whatever it happens to be, because we all crave love and affection. And our temptations, I'll tell you, I'm going to give you exactly what you need. Just come closer, come closer. T is for tired. Man, I know some of the decisions I've made when I'm tired, they're hasty and they're irrational most of the time. And they will show up. Temptations will show up when we're that vulnerable. And the last S is stress. Stress leaves us open to the promise temptations make of us. You know, to escape the pain of reality or whatever it is we're facing. You just come over to this side. It'd be so much better. So HALTS, just a little simple checklist that you can use. And it all comes around to an accountability partner. You know, when you're feeling any of those, and you're feeling tempted, I mean, this is how AA has it set up. Have an accountability partner. Phone somebody. Say, hey, dude, I'm wanting to go down this road right now, and I know I shouldn't, but man, it sure looks appetizing, and that's what I want to do. Have an accountability partner. But more than all of that, remember this. I love these words. Listen to this. When we are tempted, we can come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. Which is like hopping on his lap. Like, I need help here. There we will receive mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it. You know, this is not an easy thing. And that's why I love that we're in a community together, doing this together, so we can link arms and support each other, encourage one another when those temptations are overwhelming us. I'm really glad you're here, and I'm glad I get to do this journey with you. I invite you to pray with me. God, temptation, again, being tempted in and of itself isn't wrong. It's when we actually buy into what the temptation is selling and cross that line and do the thing that we know we shouldn't do, but we do it anyway. I just pray for all of us that you would give us the strength to remember that you can help us stand up under temptation. You will show us a way. Just give us the courage and the strength to make that choice to follow you in spite of the seductive voice that temptation may be luring us with. It's hard. And we just pray for your grace for those times that we do trip up. And that's what I love about you so much, is just you're so gracious with us, so patient with us. Just thank you for everyone's here, and we just thank you for being willing to walk with us as we make our way through this thing called life. And we pray this in your name. Amen.